Hello, Paula. Do you want to start by telling me a little bit about what led to you getting a diagnosis?
Is that now the first time I was seen by a psychiatrist, or referred to psychiatry, that sort of?
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
The first time I would have been referred to a psychiatrist, I was about 21. So I had attempted to end my life 6 weeks before I was due to get married. Up to that, I had spent most of my early childhood and teenage years really struggling and feeling completely at odds with everything. I never felt I fitted in anywhere. I didn't really socialise because I didn't really know how to, but to me it all seemed kind of normal enough. I left school and went immediately down to work in a home for intellectual disabled children. I only went for a couple of weeks over the summer to get experience, and I loved it, so I stayed. After about 2 years of that, I came back to Dublin, because I lived in the home, it was down in Wicklow. I came back to Dublin to go to college to actually get a qualification in caring. So when I moved back home, it triggered off this horrendous depression, anxiety. I was on placement through my social care. I was on a placement with the John and God Brothers, the Slowhead. So I was working in a teenage residential unit for children. I was there. I was working with children that I got on really well with. They were anorexic, and at the time I had stopped eating, and I got on very well and I loved it. But at the end of my placement, I had collapsed one day, and they decided that I wasn't mentally fit to pass my assessment, but they couldn't fail me because my work was so good.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to go and see a psychiatrist, get a clean bill of health, get my stamp of sanity, and then I could go about my business.
Mm-hmm. So can I ask, just to stop there for a second, but given that you really loved working with kids who had difficulties, different types of difficulties, did you feel at that stage that maybe there was something different about you?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
My God, yeah. I knew I was not very smart at school. Academically, I would just miss weeks at a time. I didn't have any memory, and I would be sitting in my class because I was always an extremely anxious child,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd be sitting there and pay attention. And my head would be going, you're paying attention, and I'd miss exactly what was happening. So I was constantly in trouble in school. But I never really knew why I felt so different. And then I found out kind of randomly that when I was born dead at home, and I'd had the cord knot around my neck and I'd suffered a lot of lack of oxygen. And I thought this was the best thing ever.
What age did you find that out?
I found that out when I was about 8 or 9.
Mm-hmm.
I was born at home. It was my mother who mentioned it. And I thought this was the most incredible excuse ever. Like, it's not my fault, I'm brain damaged. So I always played differently to other children. I always played alongside. I couldn't understand what really was going on and how to play with others, and I was always considered a bit weird.
Mm-hmm. And then to fast forward then to when you were going to go and see the psychiatrist to get your rubber stamp?
To get my rubber stamp, yes. So I first saw Dr. Michael McGuinness, which was a little bit odd because he was a friend of my father. And I didn't know what I was there for. I didn't eat. I had no association with why don't you eat? So we used to sit and do the Irish Times crossword. And he'd say, off you go. He started me on Prozac. And it was the first, I think I must be one of the very early patients, because when I went to the chemist, I had my prescription and I handed it to the pharmacist, and he came out, and I remember it was quite busy, and he was saying, "What's this drug? What's this drug?" And I'm like, "It's an antidepressant." And he was, "I've never heard of this." And I felt really a bit, like I felt everybody in the whole of Marino I lived knew about it, and they were judging me. I never actually spoke to Dr. McGuinness, God rest his soul, he was a lovely man, but I didn't know how to.
And did he at any stage say to you, "I think you've got diagnosis A, B,
No.
or C"? No.
No.
So he started your medication
Without
without a great discussion around.
a great discussion.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were on Prozac all with your life, and then you mentioned that you had a self-harm attempt.
Well, I didn't actually get on with my life.
Okay.
I struggled. Again, I in my home, I had a very busy home, and it was very, very dysfunctional, but this is all looking back. I finished my course a year after everybody else because I had to go back when I got my rubber stamp. I had to go back and redo the placement for a whole year. They then offered me a job, and I was like, so I got a job working with Dutch Charity, and with Spina Bifida previous to that. So that's where I met my husband, and I was going out with him a couple of years, and I used to throw everything at him. You don't want to be with me. I was angry, and why are you hanging out with me? Why do you want to marry me? But I also wanted to get out of home. I had these very serious issues at home. And so he asked me to marry him. I said, yeah, okay. Without taking anything into consideration. So we set about it, but there was nobody, no my family, no friends. Nobody thought I would actually go through with it. I was assumed to be too weird, I think. And my husband had this idea that I could rule the world one day. He had this inane belief, I don't know why. So we went along, and I say 6 weeks before, I was very, very stressed. Not about the wedding, just in my whole general life. Things were coming on top of me. And I was up in his house. His father had wanted to see me. And he said, so I hear you're not having a big wedding. I want a big wedding, and I'm inviting all my friends. And I say I would be very socially inept, and I got up. My husband was there, father-in-law, and I walked out of the house. And it's very, very vague after that, but I ended up in Galway that night. I had a month's supply of amitriptyline. I had gone from Prozac to amitriptyline, and I was wandering around Galway City. I was going to die. That was the only thought that was in my life. I had to escape all this absolute horror. So again, it's a little bit vague. I booked into a hotel. It had a room, and I remember there was a brick wall outside the window. There was no view. There was a bath, and I got into the bath, and I was, no, you're going to take these tablets. And I was happy. It was this content. But I got out of the bath, I got dressed, because I decided I can't have somebody come in tomorrow morning and find me dead. So I got dressed and I left, and I went down by the river, and I had a bottle of Lucozade, and just one by one I took, it would have been 27 amitriptyline, 25 milligrams. And I remember feeling the saddest that I could ever really imagine, the abject loneliness that I was going to die, but the peace, and that I could feel my heart was going really, really strange, my ears, the whole sensation in my body was getting fizzy, and I was lying snuggled up just against the rock. It was in July, and there was lots of people I could hear on the peripheral, but I couldn't. It was like being in a bubble, and I realised after a little while that I could still think. My body was shutting down, but my brain was alert, and I knew I was like, oh my God, I'm dying, I'm going to die, I'm going to be found dead, but my brain's actually alive, and I'm going to be conscious for the rest of eternity. And it was the most terrifying thing I have ever experienced and hope to ever experience in my life. Somehow, midday, the next day, I became conscious, and I was in shock. I couldn't understand how I'm alive, and I was so kind of just falling around the place and staggering. I didn't really know what to do. I didn't call anybody. I was just in this utter blur of, well, what now? And I'm not sure how, but I ended up in a bus and I came back to Dublin. And I remember walking up my road, and my mother came out the door and she started screaming out, "What have you done?" And I just said, I just needed to die. And my father came out and he was like, "Oh, we'll pray for you." And they brought me into the Mater Hospital. My husband, boyfriend at the time, came running down the road, and my mother threw him out. She was like, "You get out of here, it's all about you." It had nothing to do with him.
So just to move forward,
Yeah.
You met a psychiatrist that time then?
I did. I was in the Mater for a week, waiting to live or die. There was no beds in the psychiatric unit, so I was sent home. So my wedding was cancelled, and it was rearranged for the next year, and that was fine. So
sorry, were you seeing a psychiatrist through that time?
I was seeing a psychiatrist, but not on medication.
Okay.
They refused to give me any more medication because that was what you were going to do with it.
And did they give you a diagnosis? No.
I was anxious, depressed, but not a diagnosis.
And I know then over the years after that, you got married, I know, and had children. And I think your husband was right about you becoming something really important. But over the years after that, did you get a series of different diagnoses?
Yes.
Or
my next diagnosis was after the birth of my first child. I got severe postnatal depression. Easy to tick off the box. I was breastfeeding, so I refused to take medication. And with a little bit of therapy in the hospital, I fought my way through. And then out of the blue got pregnant again. I had been told I'd never have children because I'd done too much damage to myself. But after my second child, the postnatal depression was back with a bang, and when he was 5 months old, I was put into hospital. Again, I refused to take medication, but I had a fantastic psychiatrist who supported me, and I continued seeing her for quite a while. But my mental health deteriorated constantly because I kept losing time. I couldn't remember things, hours, days. I had found myself with massive cuts, but had no memory of doing it. I didn't feel any pain. And so within the hospital, they had me down with an anxiety disorder. Then I was treated for psychosis, but I wasn't quite psychotic. It was just my reality was different. I was treated with olanzapine. I was treated with a host of other kind of antipsychotic medication. And the more I was put on medication, the worse I unraveled. I did not respond to antipsychotic medication. Eating became much worse, and I literally stopped eating. So over those years, my spells in hospital were between 3-4 months, a year.
And when you say over those years, roughly what time span?
In the last 20 years.
Okay, yeah. Yeah. And then things obviously changed for you in more recent times.
With different psychiatrists,
Mhm.
things changed. My second psychiatrist, with her, she couldn't fathom why was I not responding, what was going on, and my presentation, the kind of personality changes, the missed hours, the missed weeks, it was just, she couldn't understand. So not being aware, because I wouldn't have been terribly conscious of a lot when I dissociated with somebody else. I don't know what happened at that time. She had some specialists come over from London. I was told there were specialists coming over from London, and I don't really know, but they did assessments on me for over 3 weeks. And I was given, or my doctor was given, that I had dissociative identity disorder.
And were you told that?
I was, but it didn't register. I had no interest in labels. I never knew why I was depressed. Now I had a title, and it was like, okay.
And was there a management plan attached to the diagnosis?
The management plan was, they advised that I didn't need medication for it because it was trauma related, and medication had never worked. I was on a kind of an antidepressant because it would keep the chemical in balance, I suppose. I never really questioned it. And while I was in hospital, I was given an awful lot of tranquilizers, which I fought against. I didn't want them. So the recommendation was psychotherapy to actually learn and get insight into my condition. So I saw a psychotherapist as part of the hospital. And for a lot of my treatment, I was with her for 7 years. And for many of those years, I would see her weekly. Sometimes when things were unraveling, it would be maybe twice, 3 times a week. When I'd be in hospital, she'd come in and visit me, and we'd just sit. So through the psychotherapy and my memories, and while I was disassociating, I write. So all these sheets, thousands of sheets of paper, all different handwriting, different ways of speaking, were always around. And my psychiatrist she'd take them all. Don't want to reread that. And art as well. I'd have pictures. I'd wake up in the morning and there'd be paintings, and I didn't do them. And they'd actually be signed with different people. So through psychotherapy and through, I suppose, such hard work, I learned who everybody was. So there's 10 of us, but there's another couple now, who are constant individuals who live in my life. So they all came as a child. I started with one person at 3 years of age, and I always knew her. She was Amelia. She was my invisible friend. But I was being abused as a child. But because I couldn't deal with that, because it was the special person who's supposed to look after you, I somehow created this, that everything happened to Amelia. So she was always crying, she was in the wardrobe, I was a good girl. Things got far worse, and by the time I was about 7, even Amelia couldn't deal with that. So she kind of split, and it was Kizzy and Amelia. They never grew up. They always stayed.
We could spend hours talking about the 10 people another day. But just to kind of come to today, I mean, clearly you're well.
I am well.
And understanding your diagnosis, and obviously 7 years of psychotherapy, do you feel the diagnosis came at the right time for you? Is there a way it could have come 10 years earlier?
I'd like to have had it 15 years earlier, but I never had the opportunity. There was too much. You don't see a psychiatrist. In that time, I was raped, and I had lost a baby through rape. I was told never to mention that. The counsellor that I did go to said, never tell your doctor that you're hearing voices, because they lock you up. So there's so many years on that I feel 15 years were lost, but at the same time, it is what it is. And there wasn't the knowledge. I mean, my psychiatrist told me in her 25 years of being a consultant psychiatrist, she had never had a patient with my condition. She didn't know the answer, and that was the most empowering thing. because she told me, I don't know what the prognosis is, but I'm with you. And that was the best thing.
I think that's a really powerful message.
It
isn't
is.
it?
It is. Yeah.
Because I think as doctors, we struggle with that idea of I don't know what the matter is.
Yeah. Because we expect that the doctor has to know. When I'd be really well and I wouldn't want to come into hospitals, she'd say, look, how about we make an agreement and you just come for a break. You hand over the responsibilities of carrying everything and I'll hold them for a while and you take a rest and then I'll give them back to you when you're better. So that kind of a relationship, it was unbelievable. I mean, I've had so much absolute fantastic support. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Paula. Yeah, what a really interesting conversation.